My name is Scarlett, and I am 28 years old. I work as a pediatric nurse in Nashville, Tennessee, and I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. But nothing prepared me for standing alone in my wedding dress, staring at the empty chairs where my parents and sister should have been sitting. They chose a European vacation over my wedding day. And honestly, that moment changed everything I believed about family and love. Before I share what happened, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear how I survived this. Growing up in a small town just outside Nashville, I learned early that my place in the family was always one step behind my older sister Megan. She came into this world 4 years before me, and from the moment I could understand anything, I understood that she was the star and I was merely the audience. Megan excelled at everything she touched. She brought home straight A report cards while I struggled to maintain a B average. She won beauty pageants while I watched from the folding chairs in the back row. She delivered perfect speeches at school assemblies, while I hid in bathroom stalls, too shy to speak in front of crowds. Our father Richard owned a small construction supply business, and he never missed an opportunity to point out how Megan would someday run that company better than he ever could. Our mother Diane stayed home to raise us, and while I believe she loved me in her own quiet way, she never once stood up for me when comparisons cut me down to size. I remember being 7 years old, showing my father a drawing I had made of our family. I had spent 3 hours on it, carefully coloring inside the lines, making sure everyone had smiles on their faces. He glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds before asking where Megan was, because he needed to discuss her upcoming spelling bee competition. I stood there holding that drawing until my arms ached, waiting for him to look again. He never did. By the time I reached high school, I had accepted my role as the invisible daughter. I stopped trying to compete with Megan because the race was rigged from the start. Instead, I found purpose in helping others. I volunteered at the local hospital reading stories to sick children, and something inside me clicked. I realized I could matter to people who needed care and kindness, even if I did not matter much at home. Megan earned a full scholarship to a prestigious law school in New York, and our parents acted like she had won the Nobel Prize. They threw her a going-away party with catered food and a live band. When I got accepted into nursing school 2 years later, my mother baked a cake from a box mix and my father forgot to come home for dinner. I wish I could say these memories do not still hurt, but even now, at 28, I can close my eyes and feel that 7-year-old girl holding her drawing, waiting for her father to see her. The waiting never really stopped. I just learned to expect less. The pattern of putting me second became so normal that I barely noticed it anymore. When I turned 16, my birthday party was supposed to be on a Saturday afternoon. I had invited 12 friends from school, decorated the backyard myself, and picked out my own cake since nobody asked what flavor I wanted. But the morning of my party, Megan called from New York in a panic. She had landed a prestigious internship interview scheduled for that same day, and she wanted our parents on video call to coach her through practice questions. My mother came to me with apologetic eyes. She said we needed to postpone my party by a few hours, just until Megan finished her interview prep. A few hours turned into the entire afternoon. By the time my parents emerged from their bedroom where they had been coaching Megan, half my friends had already left. The ice cream cake had melted into a puddle of sticky sweetness. I spent my 16th birthday cleaning up the mess while my parents celebrated Megan getting the internship over speakerphone. 3 years later, I graduated from nursing school near the top of my class. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. I had worked double shifts at a diner to pay for textbooks. I had studied until my eyes burned and my hands cramped from taking notes. When I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I scanned the audience for my parents. I found them in the 4th row, 40 minutes late, because they had stopped to help Megan pick out a new car on their way to my graduation. They missed hearing my name called. They missed seeing me shake hands with the dean. All they saw was me walking back to my seat, diploma already in hand. After the ceremony, my father checked his watch and mentioned they needed to get back to the dealership before it closed. Megan wanted their opinion on leather versus cloth seats. My mother hugged me quickly and said she was proud. But her eyes kept drifting to her phone where Megan was texting pictures of different car models. I smiled and told them it was fine. I had been saying those words my entire life. It was fine. Everything was always fine. The only person who ever truly saw me was my Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister. She lived in Atlanta and had been divorced for 15 years, which somehow made her the black sheep of the family. But to me, she was the only adult who treated me like I mattered. Aunt Caroline called me every Sunday night throughout my childhood. She asked about my classes, my friends, my dreams. She remembered my favorite color changed from purple to sage green when I turned 13. She sent me birthday cards that arrived on time filled with handwritten notes, telling me I was special and loved and destined for beautiful things. When I was 19 and crying in my dorm room after another holiday where my accomplishments went unnoticed, Aunt Caroline answered her phone on the first ring. She listened to me sob for 20 minutes before saying words that I have carried with me ever since. She told me that I deserve to be loved equally, not as an afterthought, not as a consolation prize, but as the main event of someone's heart. She said I should never have to beg for affection from people who were supposed to give it freely. And she promised that someday I would find people who would choose me first, every single time. I wanted to believe her. I wanted it so badly that I held on to those words like a lifeline, even when everything in my daily life contradicted them. I kept showing up for family dinners where conversations revolved around Megan's cases and promotions. I kept sending Christmas gifts that were never acknowledged. I kept hoping that maybe if I just loved them enough, they would eventually love me back the same way. But hoping and receiving are two very different things. And I was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way imaginable. 3 years before my wedding on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I walked into a small coffee shop near the hospital where I worked. My shift had been brutal. I had lost a young patient to leukemia that morning, a 6-year-old boy named Timothy, who loved dinosaurs and called me his favorite nurse. I needed caffeine and solitude and maybe a good cry in a corner booth where nobody would notice. The shop was crowded, and the only available seat was at a small table near the window, where a man sat alone staring at his untouched coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. He looked about my age with kind brown eyes and a sadness that seemed to match my own. I asked if I could share his table, fully expecting him to say no. Instead, he pulled out the chair for me and managed a small smile. His name was Derek, and he was 30 years old, a civil engineer who designed bridges and highways. We made small talk at first, the kind of meaningless conversation strangers have to fill silence. But somewhere between my second cup of coffee and his third, the conversation shifted into something deeper. He told me about his parents, how they died in a car accident when he was 7 years old. A drunk driver ran a red light and took everything from him in a single moment. After that, he went to live with his grandmother, Ruth, his mother's mother, who was 59 at the time, and working as a seamstress to make ends meet. Grandma Ruth raised Derek in a tiny 2-bedroom house with a leaky roof, and more love than most mansions ever see. She worked 16-hour days hemming pants and mending dresses, so Derek could have new shoes for school. She taught him to cook, to fix broken things, to find joy in simple moments like watching thunderstorms from the front porch. She was his mother, father, and best friend, all wrapped into one fierce and gentle woman. When Derek graduated from engineering school, his first paycheck went toward buying his grandmother a proper house with a roof that did not leak and a garden where she could grow tomatoes. He visited her every Sunday for dinner without fail. She was 82 years old now, still sharp as a tack, still making the best peach cobbler in Tennessee. Listening to Derek talk about his grandmother, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Here was a man who understood what family was supposed to feel like. Here was someone who knew that love was not about grand gestures or perfect achievements. It was about showing up day after day, choosing each other even when life got hard. We talked for 4 hours that first day. By the time the coffee shop closed, I knew I had met someone who would change my life. Our relationship grew slowly, built on long conversations and shared silences, and 1,000 small kindnesses. Derek was the first person besides Aunt Caroline who asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. He wanted to know about my favorite books, my childhood dreams, my fears and hopes, and everything in between. He made me feel seen in a way I had never experienced before. 6 months into dating, Derek took me to meet Grandma Ruth. I was nervous in a way I had never been meeting anyone else's family. I wanted her to like me not because I needed approval, but because she clearly meant everything to the man I was falling in love with. The moment I walked through her front door, Grandma Ruth opened her arms and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and fresh-baked bread. She held my face in her weathered hands, looked into my eyes, and said something I will never forget. She told me I had kind eyes, the kind that had seen pain, but still chose to be gentle. She said her grandson had found himself a good one, and she could always tell these things within the first 5 seconds of meeting someone. From that day forward, Grandma Ruth treated me like the granddaughter she never had. I started joining Derek for Sunday dinners, learning her recipes, listening to stories about the old days when she used to sew wedding dresses for all the girls in town. She became the grandmother I never knew I needed, filling spaces in my heart that my own family had left empty. Derek and I dated for 2 years before he proposed. He did it at the coffee shop where we first met on the anniversary of that rainy Tuesday, when I sat down at his table and everything changed. He got down on one knee right there between the espresso machine and the pastry case, with Grandma Ruth watching from a nearby booth, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. I said yes before he even finished asking the question. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Planning a wedding should be one of the happiest times in a woman's life. For a little while, it actually was. Derek and I decided on June 15th for our wedding date. We chose it for several reasons that felt deeply meaningful. It was the anniversary of our first meeting at the coffee shop. The weather in Nashville would be perfect for an outdoor ceremony. And most importantly, the church where Grandma Ruth had worshipped for 50 years had that date available on their calendar. We put down deposits on everything. The church cost us $3,000 to reserve. The reception venue, a charming barn on the outskirts of town, required another $2,500. We booked a photographer who specialized in candid shots for $1,500, and a caterer who promised to make Derek's favorite smoked brisket for another $2,000. Altogether, we had committed nearly $8,000 of our savings to making this day perfect. I called my parents to share the news of our engagement and the wedding date. My father answered, sounding distracted as always. I told him we were getting married on June 15th and waited for some kind of enthusiasm. He paused for a moment, then said he would write it down. That was it. No congratulations. No questions about Derek or the proposal. Just a promise to note the date in his calendar, delivered in the same tone he might use to schedule a dentist appointment. My mother got on the phone briefly to say she was happy for me. But before I could share any details, she mentioned that Megan was on the other line with exciting news about a big case at work. She asked if we could talk later, then hung up before I had a chance to respond. I sat on my couch that night, staring at my engagement ring, trying to convince myself that their reaction did not matter. Derek held me close and told me that we would make our own happiness, with or without my family's enthusiasm. I believed him because I had no other choice. 3 months before the wedding, everything changed. Derek came home from visiting Grandma Ruth looking like someone had punched him in the stomach. He sat down at our kitchen table without speaking, and I knew before he opened his mouth that something terrible had happened. The doctors had found spots on Grandma Ruth's lungs. Stage 4 cancer already spread too far for surgery. They gave her 4 to 6 months, possibly less, if the treatment did not slow things down. Derek broke down in a way I had never seen before. This man who designed bridges strong enough to hold thousands of cars wept like a child in my arms, asking why God would take the only parent he had ever known. I held him all night, whispering promises I was not sure I could keep, telling him we would get through this together. The next morning, Derek and I went to see Grandma Ruth. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, looking smaller than I remembered, but her eyes still held that familiar sparkle. She patted the spot next to her on the sofa and asked us to sit down. She said she already knew about the diagnosis, and she did not want us to treat her any differently. She was 82 years old, had lived a full life, raised a wonderful grandson, and seen him find the love of his life. But there was one thing she wanted more than anything in this world. She wanted to watch Derek get married before she died. I took her hand in mine, feeling the paper-thin skin and delicate bones beneath. I promised her that nothing would stop us from getting married on June 15th. Nothing would keep her from sitting in that front pew and watching her grandson say his vows. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength and smiled through her tears. From that moment on, the wedding was no longer just about Derek and me. It was about keeping a promise to a dying woman who had given everything she had to raise the man I loved. We scaled back our plans to accommodate Derek's mounting medical expenses for his grandmother. I made our wedding invitations myself using cardstock and a printer from the local office supply store. My best friend Brooke, who worked with me at the hospital, volunteered to handle all the decorations using silk flowers from the craft store. Aunt Caroline insisted on paying for the real flower arrangements, refusing to let me walk down the aisle without fresh roses. Everything was falling into place. I allowed myself to believe that despite the shadow of Grandma Ruth's illness, our wedding would be beautiful. I allowed myself to hope that maybe my family would show up and share in our joy. I should have known better. The phone call came 6 weeks before the wedding on a Thursday evening, when I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My feet ached. My scrubs were stained with apple juice from a toddler who had thrown his cup at me, and I wanted nothing more than a hot bath and 8 hours of sleep. My mother's number flashed across my phone screen. She rarely called me directly, so I answered immediately, wondering if something was wrong. Her voice sounded strange, hesitant, in a way I had not heard before. She said she needed to talk to me about the wedding, and she hoped I would be understanding about what she was going to ask. My stomach tightened. I asked what was going on. She explained that Megan had planned a trip to Europe, a 3-week vacation that she had been organizing for 2 years. The trip ran from June 10th to June 25th. Megan had booked flights, hotels, guided tours, and non-refundable experiences throughout France, Italy, and Spain. She could not move the dates without losing thousands of dollars in deposits. I waited, not understanding where this was going. My mother continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. She asked if I could possibly move my wedding to sometime in July, after Megan returned from her trip. That way, the whole family could be together for my big day. For a moment, I could not speak. The request was so outrageous, so completely absurd, that my brain refused to process it. When I finally found my voice, I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I told her about Grandma Ruth's diagnosis, about the 4 to 6 months the doctors had given her, about how June 15th might be the last chance she had to see Derek get married. I told her about the $8,000 in non-refundable deposits we had already paid. I told her that moving the wedding was simply not possible. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she understood, and that she would talk to my father and Megan. I hung up, feeling unsettled but hopeful. Surely once they understood the circumstances, they would realize how unreasonable the request had been. Surely they would put a dying woman's last wish ahead of a vacation. 2 days later, Megan called me directly. I had not spoken to my sister in almost 3 months. She was always too busy with work, too caught up in her important life in New York, to bother checking in on her little sister in Nashville. But apparently this situation warranted her personal attention. Her voice was ice cold when she spoke. She told me I was being incredibly selfish, and that she had been planning this trip for 2 years. 2 years of research, of saving vacation days, of coordinating with friends who were joining her. And I expected her to throw all of that away because I could not be flexible with my wedding date. I tried to explain about Grandma Ruth again, but Megan cut me off. She said that Ruth was Derek's grandmother, not mine. Why should she sacrifice her once-in-a-lifetime European adventure for some old woman she had never even met? If I really love my family, I would find a way to make this work. July was just as good as June for a wedding. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let her hear me cry. I told her that I was sorry she felt that way, but I could not and would not change the date. Grandma Ruth might not be alive in July. Derek and I had made a promise to her. Megan's voice turned sharp. She said if I went through with this wedding without her there, I would regret it for the rest of my life. She said our parents would side with her because they always did. And she said that I was choosing a stranger over my own flesh and blood. Then she delivered her final blow. She told me that if I did not change the date, she would not attend, and she would make sure our parents did not attend either. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen phone, still pressed against my ear, listening to the silence where my sister's voice had been. I thought about every time I had been pushed aside, every birthday that was overshadowed, every achievement that went unnoticed. I thought about Grandma Ruth sitting in her armchair, asking for one simple thing before she died, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would not change my wedding date. Not for Megan, not for anyone. The week following Megan's ultimatum was one of the darkest periods of my life. My father called on a Sunday afternoon, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when he expected complete obedience. He told me he had heard about my conversation with Megan, and he was disappointed in my behavior. I asked him to listen to my side of the story. I explained everything again: the cancer diagnosis, the limited time, the promise we had made. I begged him to understand that this was not about being stubborn or difficult. This was about a dying woman's final wish. He cut me off before I could finish. He said that I had always been difficult, always wanting to do things my own way, without considering how it affected the rest of the family. Megan had sacrificed so much for our family over the years, and I could not even make this one small compromise for her. I wanted to scream. What sacrifices had Megan ever made? She had taken everything from me my entire life, every ounce of attention, every drop of praise, every moment that should have been mine. But I swallowed my anger and asked him simply to please come to my wedding. His response was immediate and final. He said that if I was going to be this selfish, then he and my mother would not be attending. This was my choice, and I would have to live with the consequences. The call ended with a click that echoed through my apartment like a gunshot. I called my mother next, desperately hoping she would be the voice of reason. She had always been the softer parent, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made peace between us. She answered on the third ring, and I could hear the tension in her hello. I poured out my heart to her. I told her how much it would mean to have her at my wedding, how I had dreamed of this day since I was a little girl, how I needed my mother there when I walked down the aisle. She started crying, which made me cry too. She said she wanted to come, she truly did. But I had to understand her position. My father was furious, and Megan would never forgive her if she attended without the rest of the family. She was caught in the middle, and she did not know what to do. I asked her just once to choose me. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. She said maybe if I just thought about it a little more, I might see that moving the wedding was not such a big deal. After all, weddings could happen any time of year. And maybe Grandma Ruth would hold on longer than the doctors predicted. Miracles happened all the time. I told her that I loved her, but I could not change the date. I would not break my promise to a dying woman, so that Megan could see the Eiffel Tower. My mother said she understood in a voice that made it clear she did not understand at all. Then she told me she had to go because dinner was almost ready. I hung up and threw my phone across the room. The days that followed brought a steady stream of criticism from all directions. Megan texted me constantly, each message more hostile than the last. She wrote that I was tearing the family apart. She wrote that Grandma Ruth was manipulating Derek and me to get attention. She wrote that I would look back on this moment and realize I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I stopped reading her messages after the fifth one. But I could not stop them from coming, lighting up my phone screen with accusations and threats throughout the day. The gossip spread through our extended family like wildfire. Megan had called aunts, uncles, and cousins I had not spoken to in years, painting me as the villain of some dramatic family tragedy. My phone rang constantly with relatives I barely knew, all of them urging me to reconsider. A great aunt I had met perhaps 3 times in my entire life called to tell me that family always comes first, and I was being disrespectful to my parents. A cousin I remembered only from a blurry childhood photograph sent me a lengthy email about the importance of keeping the peace. Everyone had an opinion, and not a single person asked to hear my side of the story. Not one of them knew about Grandma Ruth. Not one of them cared enough to ask why I had chosen this date. They simply accepted Megan's version of events as gospel truth, because that was how it had always been in our family. Derek wanted to confront my family directly. He was furious on my behalf, pacing our apartment like a caged animal, wanting to defend me against people who should have loved me unconditionally. But I asked him not to. Fighting would only make things worse, and I was tired of battles I could never win. Instead, I went quiet. I stopped answering calls from family members. I muted Megan's texts. I focused on the things I could control, like hemming my wedding dress and finalizing the playlist for our reception, and making sure Grandma Ruth's favorite flowers would be in my bouquet. Some nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was making a mistake. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should just give in, like I always had reschedule everything disappoint Derek and his grandmother, so that my sister could have her vacation. Then I would remember Grandma Ruth's face when she asked to see Derek get married. I would remember the lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued, and I would find my resolve again. I was done being the daughter who sacrificed everything to keep the peace. This time, I was going to keep my promise. 2 weeks before the wedding, Grandma Ruth's health took a sharp decline. The cancer was spreading faster than anyone had expected. She now required oxygen around the clock, and Derek had hired a part-time nurse to help care for her during the hours when he was at work. Every day felt borrowed, every moment precious. I visited her on a quiet Sunday afternoon, while Derek ran errands. I found her sitting by the window in her bedroom watching the birds at the feeder. She could no longer fill herself. The oxygen tubes stretched across her face like delicate vines, but her eyes were still bright with the intelligence and warmth I had come to love. She patted the space beside her on the bed, and I sat down carefully, afraid that even a gentle movement might somehow hurt her. She asked how the wedding planning was going. I told her everything was coming together beautifully, leaving out the parts about my family, because I did not want to burden her with my problems. But Grandma Ruth had always been able to read people. She looked at me with those knowing eyes and asked what was really going on. So I told her. I told her about my parents, about Megan, about the ultimatum and the silence and the avalanche of criticism from relatives I barely knew. I told her I was scared that I was making the wrong choice, that maybe I should just postpone the wedding and keep the peace with my family. She listened without interrupting, her weathered hand resting on mine. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke in a voice that was weaker than it used to be, but still carried unmistakable wisdom. She told me that family was not defined by blood or birth certificates. Family was the people who chose to love you without conditions, who showed up when it mattered, who made you feel like you belonged. She said that I had more family than I realized, if only I would open my eyes to see them. She told me that she had watched me with Derek for almost 3 years now, and she had seen how much light I brought into his life. She said I was already her granddaughter in every way that mattered, and nothing would make her prouder than watching me marry the boy she had raised. Then she said something that I will carry with me until my last breath. She told me never to let anyone make me feel unworthy of love. She said that the people who truly belonged in my life would show up without being begged, without conditions, without ultimatums. And the ones who did not show up were simply making room for better people to take their place. I cried then, pressing my face against her thin shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and laundry soap that always surrounded her. She stroked my hair with trembling fingers and told me everything was going to be all right. I left her house that day feeling something I had not felt in weeks. Peace. The support came from unexpected places. Aunt Caroline called me that night from Atlanta, her voice bright with determination. She told me she had booked her flight to Nashville and would be arriving 3 days before the wedding. She was going to help me with last-minute preparations, and if my parents did not show up to walk me down the aisle, she would be honored to do it herself. I tried to protest to tell her she did not have to do that. But she cut me off with a laugh. She said she had been waiting my entire life for a chance to be the mother figure I deserved. She was not about to miss this opportunity. Brooke organized a surprise bachelorette party at the hospital, convincing our coworkers to decorate the break room with balloons and streamers while I was finishing my shift. 20 women I worked with every day gathered to celebrate me sharing stories and laughter and cake that someone had made from scratch. For one beautiful evening, I forgot about my family and remembered that I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. Marcus Derek's best friend and our soon-to-be best man took charge of all the logistical challenges. He coordinated transportation for out-of-town guests. He confirmed reservations with vendors. He even practiced his speech on me, making me laugh with jokes that were just corny enough to be charming. Derek himself became my rock through everything. He held me when I cried and distracted me when I spiraled. He reminded me daily that we were building our own family now, one that would be based on love and respect and showing up for each other no matter what. A week before the wedding, I made a decision. I sat down at my computer and wrote a long message to the family group chat that had been buzzing with criticism for weeks. I explained everything clearly and calmly. I told them about Grandma Ruth's illness and the promise we had made. I told them about the deposits we would lose if we changed the date. I told them that I had spent my entire life putting myself last, and this was the one time I was choosing to honor a commitment that truly mattered. I ended the message with 3 simple sentences. I wrote that I loved my family and always would. I wrote that I hoped they would change their minds and be there to celebrate with me. And I wrote that regardless of their decision, I was getting married on June 15th, and nothing would change that. No one responded. I put my phone away and did not check it again. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. I had said everything I needed to say. 3 days before the wedding, Aunt Caroline arrived at my door with 2 massive suitcases and a smile that could light up the entire state of Tennessee. She took one look at the dark circles under my eyes and announced that she was taking charge. For the next 72 hours, she was everywhere at once. She picked up the flower arrangements and made sure every rose was perfect. She did a final fitting of my dress, adjusting the hem by exactly 1/4 inch because she noticed it was dragging slightly on the left side. She cooked meals so I would actually eat instead of surviving on coffee and anxiety. On the night before the wedding, we sat together on my couch drinking chamomile tea and watching a terrible romantic comedy that made us both laugh. Aunt Caroline turned to me during a commercial break and took my hands in hers. She told me that no matter what happened tomorrow, she was proud of the woman I had become. She said I had more courage and grace than anyone she knew, and Derek was the luckiest man alive to be marrying me. I hugged her so hard I probably cracked a rib. For the first time in weeks, I went to bed feeling hopeful. The morning of June 15th dawned clear and warm, exactly the kind of perfect Nashville summer day we had dreamed about when choosing this date. I woke up at 6 in the morning, too nervous to sleep any longer. Brooke arrived at 7 with coffee and pastries. The hairstylist came at 8, transforming my ordinary brown hair into an elegant updo decorated with tiny flowers that matched my bouquet. The makeup artist worked magic at 9, making my eyes look larger and more radiant than they had ever been. At 10:30, I stepped into my wedding dress for the final time. It was not an expensive gown. We had bought it off the rack from a bridal outlet store and altered it ourselves, Aunt Caroline and me working together over 3 weekends. But standing in front of the mirror, I thought it was the most beautiful dress in the world. Brooke and my other bridesmaids gathered around me, adjusting my veil and telling me how stunning I looked. Aunt Caroline stood in the doorway, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. We drove to the church in a rented limousine that Derek had insisted on saying that every bride deserved to arrive in style. I watched the Nashville streets pass by through the tinted windows, counting down the minutes until I would become someone's wife. The church was small and white, with a steeple that had been standing for over 100 years. When we arrived, I could see guests filtering inside dressed in their Sunday best. I saw Derek's coworkers and friends. I saw nurses from the hospital who had taken time off to celebrate with us. I saw Marcus standing by the front door looking sharp in his tuxedo. But as we pulled closer, I noticed something that made my heart sink. The parking spaces reserved for my family were empty. I had held on to a tiny flicker of hope that they would change their minds at the last moment, that my mother would show up with tears in her eyes, apologizing for everything, that my father would walk through the door ready to give me away, that Megan would realize how wrong she had been. But the empty spaces told the truth. They were not coming. Aunt Caroline saw me looking and squeezed my hand. She told me not to give them another thought. Today was my day, and I was surrounded by people who loved me. That was all that mattered. I took a deep breath and nodded. She was right. I had spent my whole life waiting for my family to show up for me. Today, I was done waiting. The music began to play inside the church, the familiar notes of the wedding march drifting through the open doors. Aunt Caroline stood beside me, her arm linked through mine, ready to walk me down the aisle. I looked at her, this woman who had always seen me even when my own parents could not. I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me too. Then she said it was time. We stepped through the church doors together. The aisle stretched before me, lined with white rose petals that Brooke had scattered that morning. The pews were filled with smiling faces, friends and colleagues, and chosen family members who had come to witness this moment. And at the end of the aisle stood Derek. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that we had picked out together. His eyes were red, and I could see tears already streaming down his cheeks. Beside him sat Grandma Ruth in her wheelchair, dressed in the lavender suit she had saved for special occasions, an oxygen tank tucked discreetly behind her chair. Grandma Ruth was smiling so wide that I could see it from the back of the church. I walked toward them one step at a time, not looking at the empty seats on the left side of the church where my family should have been sitting. I kept my eyes fixed on Derek and his grandmother, on the future we were building together. When I reached the altar, Aunt Caroline kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Derek's. Derek leaned close and whispered that I was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The pastor, a kind man named William, who had known Derek since childhood, welcomed everyone and began the ceremony. I barely heard the words. I was too busy looking at Derek, at the love in his eyes, at the trembling in his hands, as he held mine. I was too busy feeling grateful for this moment, for this man, for the life we were about to begin. When it came time for our vows, I spoke from the heart. I told Derek that he had taught me what real love looked like. I told him that being with him felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. I promised to stand beside him through every storm, to hold his hand, through every darkness, to choose him again and again for the rest of my days. Derek's vows made me cry. He talked about the rainy Tuesday when I had spilled coffee on his shirt, and how he had known from that first moment that I was special. He talked about how I had become a granddaughter to Grandma Ruth, how I had stepped into their little family and made it complete. He promised to spend every day of his life making sure I knew how loved and valued I was. Pastor William pronounced us husband and wife. Derek kissed me while everyone cheered, and I heard Grandma Ruth's thin voice rise above the crowd calling out that she was the proudest grandmother in all of Tennessee. We were married. Despite everything my family had done, despite the empty chairs and the broken promises, we had kept our word to the woman who had raised Derek. Grandma Ruth had watched her grandson get married, just like she had dreamed. And I had walked down the aisle surrounded by people who truly loved me, even if none of them shared my blood. Grandma Ruth lived for 3 more months after the wedding. Those months were a gift, precious and bittersweet. Derek and I visited her every single day, sometimes staying for hours. other times just stopping by to hold her hand and tell her we loved her. She grew weaker as the weeks passed, sleeping more, eating less, but her spirit remained unbroken. On her last day, she called Derek and me to her bedside. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words were clear. She told us that she was ready to go. She had lived a good life, raised a wonderful man, and seen him find his person. She had no regrets, no unfinished business, no reason to hold on any longer. She told Derek that his parents would have been so proud of the man he had become. She told me that I was the daughter she had always wished for. Then she closed her eyes and slipped away peaceful as a candle flame going out. Derek and I held each other and cried until we had nothing left. The funeral was small and beautiful, just the way Grandma Ruth would have wanted. Her church friends filled the pews, sharing stories of her kindness and generosity. Pastor Williams spoke about her unwavering faith and her gift for making everyone feel loved. We buried her in the plot beside her daughter Derek's mother, beneath a magnolia tree that she had always admired. I missed her terribly. I still do. But I know she left this world happy, having seen her grandson marry the woman he loved. I know she is at peace. 3 days after the funeral, my mother called. I almost did not answer. But something made me pick up the phone. Maybe curiosity, maybe exhaustion, maybe a tiny stubborn hope that refused to die completely. My mother was crying before she said a single word. She told me she was sorry. She said she had watched videos of my wedding that Brooke had posted on social media, and she had seen how happy I looked. She had seen the empty seats on my side of the church, and for the first time she had felt ashamed of what she had done. She begged me to forgive her. I listened without interrupting, letting her words wash over me. Part of me wanted to scream at her to list every hurt she had caused, to make her understand the depth of the pain she had inflicted. But another part of me, the part that Grandma Ruth had spoken to in those final weeks, knew that anger would only poison my own heart. I told my mother that I forgave her. I told her that I loved her, and always would. But I also told her that things could not go back to the way they were. I was no longer willing to be the daughter who accepted crumbs while Megan got the whole feast. If she wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be different. Equal. Real. My mother cried harder and said she understood. I told her that I hoped she meant it. Then I gently ended the call. My father never apologized. As far as I know, he still believes he was right. Megan never called either. The last I heard, she had posted pictures from her European vacation all over social media, captioning them with inspirational quotes about living your best life. I made peace with their silence. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. I accepted that some people would never change no matter how much you love them. I accepted that I deserve better than waiting for scraps of affection from people who saw me as an afterthought. I accepted that the family I had built, Derek, Aunt Caroline, Brooke, the friends who had shown up when it mattered, was more than enough. I started seeing a therapist about 6 months after the wedding. She helped me work through the childhood wounds I had carried for so long, the feelings of inadequacy and invisibility that had shaped so much of my life. Week by week, session by session, I learned to separate my worth from my parents' approval. It was not easy. Healing never is. But slowly, I began to feel lighter. The weight I had carried for 28 years started to lift. I stopped apologizing for existing. I stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I learned that setting boundaries was not selfish, but necessary, not cruel, but kind. Derek and I built a beautiful life together in our little house in Nashville. We adopted a golden retriever named Honey, who sleeps at the foot of our bed every night. We planted a garden in the backyard, growing tomatoes just like Grandma Ruth used to. We talk about having children someday, about raising them in a home where everyone's voice matters equally. Aunt Caroline visits every few months, filling our house with laughter and too much food. She has become the mother I always needed, the one who shows up without conditions or ultimatums. And every Sunday, Derek and I take flowers to Grandma Ruth's grave. We tell her about our week, our plans, our dreams. We thank her for bringing us together, for teaching us what family really means. If I could go back in time and speak to that scared woman standing in her wedding dress, looking at empty chairs, I would tell her this. I would tell her that family is not about blood or obligation. Family is about choice. It is about the people who see you, truly see you, and love you anyway. It is about showing up when it matters, about keeping promises, even when it is hard, about making room in your heart for people who deserve to be there. I would tell her that saying no to people who take you for granted is not selfish. It is survival. It is self-respect. It is the first step toward building a life where you do not have to beg for love. I would tell her that the empty chairs hurt, but they also create space. Space for the right people to sit down. Space for real love to grow. And I would tell her that one day she will look back on this moment not with pain, but with gratitude. Because this was the day she stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing herself. If you are watching this, and you have ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most, I want you to know that you are not alone. Your feelings are valid. Your worth is not determined by how much attention your family gives you. You deserve to be loved loudly and completely. You deserve to be someone's first choice, not their backup plan. And if the people who share your blood cannot give you that, then go build your own family. Fill your life with people who celebrate you, who show up for you, who make you feel like the gift that you are. I promise you, they are out there waiting. You just have to stop accepting less than you deserve. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever had to stand up to your family for something you believed in? Even when it cost you dearly, I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this video touched your heart, please hit that like button and let me know. And if you are not already subscribed, I would be honored to have you join this community. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are worthy of real love. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being here with me. I hope wherever you are tonight, you know that you matter. You are enough, and the right people will always find their way to you. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.